I'm taking a look at the book Middlemarch, A Study of Provincial Life by George Eliot. It's a book that I've been wanting to read for quite a while because it's often considered one of the best, if not the best, English novels ever written. George Eliot's real name was Mary Ann Evans. She was a very important writer during the Victorian era in England, and she started off writing a lot of nonfiction, political essays, philosophy, that sort of thing. And then her partner sort of coaxed her into trying her hand at fiction, and as a result she ended up turning out some really amazing classics. This is her most famous, and it's also her longest. It's a whopping 900 pages. It originally came out in 8 volumes, and it focuses on a slice of life examination of this fictional town called Middlemarch. You get a whole big cast of characters. You've got Dorothy Brooke, who is this young woman who just became of marriageable age and decides to marry this much older man because he's this strange intellectual and the whole town is scandalized. You've got Fred Vincy, who is this guy from a well-to-do family, but he's a bit of a spendthrift and a gambler, and his debts start to catch up with him. You've got Mr. Featherstone, who is extremely rich, and he's getting old and sickly, so his relatives are waiting on him to die so they can inherit his wealth. And then you've got a newcomer to the town, Dr. Lydgate. Through all of these characters, the story weaves things together the further you go, and plays on a lot of themes having to do with class and gender and the hypocritical social expectations of the time. All of that probably sounds pretty overwhelming, and believe me, I was pretty intimidated when I first got into this novel, knowing what a tapestry it is, because I often struggle with character names and how characters are related to one another and keeping it all straight in my head. But somehow I really didn't struggle with this book at all, despite how many characters and relations there are. Part of that is because of how Eliot brings you into this world. You're not just given everything all in a very quick stretch. Instead, you're kind of given this isolated chunk of characters, just a small set of people to follow for the first while, and then you move into a completely different set of characters and follow them for a while. Their stories start to intermingle, of course, but by the time they do, you've already gotten well used to all of the eccentric personalities. It also helps that Eliot is clearly a brilliant writer. Her prose and her dialogue jumps right off the page, so I was immersed enough that it was much easier keeping characters clear in my head. The start of the novel is also surprisingly brisk in its pacing. It slows down as it goes, but within the first 60 pages, you've got sisters mourning a death in the family, you've got looking for love and marriage, you've got navigating a love triangle to the proposal and the engagement, all happening in a way that's fast-paced, but also organic. You never feel like it's rushing or anything like that. The book is also strikingly funny. There were a lot of moments where I was surprised to find myself laughing out loud, and a lot of the humor came entirely from the interactions between the characters. In fact, most of the story and most of the tension arises entirely from interactions from the characters' butting heads and their different personalities and backgrounds all sort of coming together in a way that makes for some interesting sparks. My favorite character of the bunch is definitely Dorothy Brooke. She's very eccentric and a little bit of an oddball, so she doesn't fit in with the social mold that she's expected to play into. She's interested in pursuits of the intellect. She wants to be very independent. She wants to give back some of her status and wealth in order to help raise other people up. And then you have Dorothy's opposite, who is Rosamund Vincy, my least favorite character in the book. And by that I mean, I loved to hate this character, okay? She's vain, she's entitled, she wants nothing more than to basically be a decorative background piece in a rich man's home. It's really interesting how the character contrasts are played off each other to make certain points. For example, here we're looking at sort of the full gamut of what women were expected to be versus what happens if you push against those expectations with Dorothy. And it made me really glad that I read the book, The Vindication of the Rights of Woman by Mary Wollstonecraft, earlier this year, because it laid a really great foundation for understanding the depth of this book's criticisms and examinations of rigid gender roles of the time. The pacing of the story definitely slows down quite a bit as events unfold and we're introduced to new characters. There were places where it dragged, but of course there's bound to be in a book that's this long. Overall, though, I thought it was well told enough that I stayed pretty interested and just kind of going along with the flow. Another thing that I found notable about this book is the omniscient perspective, where we're really going into every character's head on a dime. The omniscient narration sometimes leads into what I consider the more challenging aspects of this book. We get these introspective sections that are almost like interludes that cut away from the main action and instead just dive directly into the characters' minds and just spend some time there learning about their fears and their hopes, their motivations, how they feel about events and characters as things unfold. And it gives Eliot space to sort of ruminate on certain subjects like womanhood and married life and aging and feeling like you're not in control of your own path, and all of these interesting subjects, and a lot of the time they are very insightful and beautiful even all this time later, but at other times it feels like it really sort of slows down the pacing. Some of the sections feel a little bit too long or overly expository, where we're kind of retreading information that we already should have gleaned just from watching events unfold. As you get deeper into the story, you'll notice this steadily rising sense of intrigue that starts to pull away from being a typical slice of life story. There's suddenly all of these thickening plot elements, some dark mysteries that are revealed that sort of upset the dynamics of what's going on in Middlemarch. At other times, the book sort of plays into your expectations. You can see certain plot developments coming from quite far away, but then when they happen, they unfold in a way that's kind of outside of what you were expecting, or they complicate things in a way that you didn't see coming. So it actually becomes fairly suspenseful in a few places, like for example the will reading scene, and at one point I even said that it reminds me of like a more polite version of Game of Thrones, where some of the characters are jockeying for power and working behind other characters' backs. But I don't want to give you the sense that this is some like high stakes intrigue filled thriller or anything. It really isn't, because overall the book has a pretty mild slice of life tone. It's just that within this bigger picture, there's other elements pulling the strings that give things an elevated sense of drama that I was not expecting when I first picked this book up. Even when it was dealing with plot elements that we've all seen a million times before, like several love triangles, I found myself invested every time just purely based on the strength of the writing. However, there were some cumulative things that sort of built up over the course of the story that were minor detractors for me. In the last third or so of the book, I found that there was a lot of coincidence going on, similar to a Charles Dickens novel or a Greek tragedy or something. With a book this old, that's something I've sort of come to expect, so it didn't bother me that much. What I found was bothering me more is that there's quite a lot of like conveniently placed time skips that jump over significant events and markers in the characters' lives. For example, a lot of characters get married, but you never see a wedding. A lot of characters have kids, but you never see a childbirth. It just conveniently skips like a few months ahead, and you're like, oh, I have to like reacquaint myself with the new state of affairs. There's also the fact that the rising stakes in this story are not uniform. Some characters have higher stakes stories than others. So sometimes when I was leaving those characters' perspectives, I really felt that drop in momentum. And then we have the political references. This book is responding to a lot of contemporary politics stuff that was going on a few decades before this book came out. most notably the Reform Bill of 1832. All of these characters were talking about the bill, what side are you on, and the community was getting kind of divided, so I had to go and look it up and fill myself in. Most of the time you can fill yourself in just with context clues in the book, but I did find there were a few points where I really needed to have the background, and I couldn't help but feel that I was missing a little bit to help me appreciate what these sections were trying to say. Outside of the very specific political references going on in this book, I found myself really enjoying and sinking into this book's themes and the criticisms it had for society at the time. Like I said, it does get into gender and class, and the way it explores those things is always interesting. There's a section, for example, where this husband and wife get into a bit of a fight because of financial situations. They're sort of falling into hard times. This clash comes from this deep-rooted gender expectation that has been put into both of them, and the way it's done, I think, is very smart. And then outside of that, you've got this encroaching modernity that's ready to change this small traditional little town. You've got rail coming, and so soon these locomotives are going to be connecting Middlemarch to all of these areas around England, and so they're all concerned and anxious about all the big changes that are coming with the advancement of technology. I think the book explores a lot of themes and balances them all quite well. I think if I learned a little bit more about the politics at the time, that I would come back to this book and get even more out of it. For now though, I give Middlemarch a 7.5 out of 10, which makes it the best book I've read all year. If you're a fan of authors like Jane Austen or E.M. Forster, then you will probably like this book as well. It's honestly one of my favorite Victorian novels that I've ever read. The characters are some of the best I've read in years. It's funny, it's witty, it's atmospheric and insightful into the human condition. It had some areas where it dragged, where I felt there were some pacing priorities I would have changed, but really, I enjoyed this book a lot. Reading this really kind of fired me up and made me realize there's a lot of Victorian novels I have yet to read. I've probably read less than 10, so I have a lot of catching up to do on this very rich vein in literary history. But yeah, that's me. I've been deep in the reads. If you've read George Eliot or Middlemarch or any other classics from this period, hey, I'd love to hear from you. Let me know your thoughts, if you agree or disagree with my review. And yeah, thank you for watching. I will see you whenever my next time is.